Hello everyone, my name is Butterpeanut, and I am here today to talk to you about a healing and Boon Tempest support build for raids. First, before we dive into the details of the build, let's talk about who this build is for and who it's not for. Starting off with who it's not for. This build is not for a high-end speed clear guild. It is not going to provide the same offensive buffs that a support druid would provide in that specific setting. This build is not for groups who always run two healers either, one of which being a druid. The main reason for that is you already have most of the boons that you are going to get out of this build from your support druid, so if you have a second healer, being a Tempest, you are better off running a pure healing staff variant that just focuses on healing and rezzing. This is also not a build that just does Might and Fury while doing high DPS, such as the Condi Tempest build. This build is meant to act as a healer. So now we've kind of covered who this is not for, let's talk about who it is for. This build is for groups who are currently running one druid as their main healer. Maybe they want to mix it up. Maybe they only have one druid player, or maybe that one healing druid causes a bunch of wipes because they don't have quite enough healing to sustain the damage of the fight. This is also for a group who is currently running two healers, but they want to try to slowly work down towards running one healer in a fight. Next, we're going to talk about what has changed and why this build is coming to play now. The two major changes that have caused this build to come back into play now is changes to the tempestuous or Harrier trait and adding boons to each of the individual shouts. The 4 utility shouts were given an individual boon in the last balance patch. Feel the Burn was given extra might. Flash Freeze was given regeneration. Aftershock was given protection. And Rebound was given fury. In addition, Eye of the Storm was given swiftness. You don't always run Eye of the Storm, but there are use cases where if you need a stun break or your swiftness uptime is low and your uptime of the other boons is high, where you can run this shout as well. There could be specific use cases where you don't run all 5 shouts, but for the argument of this video, I'm going to assume that everyone's going to be running 5 shouts here for support. Next, we will go through an overview of the build, starting with the gear. Luckily, the gear in this build has a wide variety of different pieces that you can choose from. In my current setup, I have a mix of Harriers, Minstrel, and Magi gear. Just make sure that when you are gearing out that you do not get more toughness than you expect that your tank is going to have. My tanks always have more than this amount of toughness, so I'm not worried about 1286. In addition, you want to aim for as high as boon duration as you can, but also not being very squishy with 11k HP. 58% boon duration is plenty for this build. You could run full Harriers if you would like to, but you will have much higher boon duration at the expense of being much more squishy. The rune choice for this build should be Superior Rune of the Monk. There are a few other runes that you could possibly run, but gaining boon duration, healing, and extra healing effectiveness is the best in my opinion. For sigils, we'll want to run the Superior Sigil of Concentration for extra boon duration, and the Superior Sigil of Transference for extra healing. For weapons, we always want to run an offhand Warhorn in this build. I currently have a main hand dagger equipped, but you could also run main hand scepter. Both have their pros and cons, but both are very similar in their output. Talking about the Warhorn specifically because its skills are what make the build. Let's go through the number 4 skill on each of the elemental attunements and talk about why those particular skills are so strong. Starting with fire. Fire number 4 is called Heat Sink. It gives stacks of might to yourself and then spreads the boons that you have to your allies. This build is able to output a ton of might and fury due to this skill because when you spread the 25 might that you have on yourself to your allies, it copies that over. Moving into water. Tidal Surge is very strong in that it does some healing, some CC, but also, most importantly for our use case, it actually gives 12 seconds of regeneration to the allies that it hits. Moving into air, Cyclone is very strong in that it does a CC, gives some swiftness, but most importantly for us is that number of impacts being the number 9. This skill, when passed through all of our allies, should give us 10-man swiftness if they are all in a line. Moving to Earth, Sand Squall applies protection and then increases the duration of all boons on our allies by 3 seconds. This is a 10-target ability, which is perfect to synergy with Chrono's Signet of Inspiration. Not only does this extend the boons that the Tempest will generate, but also quickness and alacrity and other boons generated by other sources. Finally, we're going to move on to the traits. In this build, all of the trait lines have an individual use case where they could make sense. Then I'm going to go through the pros and cons of each. Starting with Tempest. We'll first review the trait lines that I have used most often, and then review some optional choices. In the first line, we'll take Unstable Conduit. This will grant us an aura based on our overload of our attunement. Next, we will take Tempestuous Aria. This is the trait that was buffed for the last patch, and is what makes this build so strong. It gives shouts increased targets from 5 to 10, and it grants extra might based on the shouts and does weakness. Finally, we'll take Elemental Bastion. This is what gives our main healing. It allows our auras to heal allies, and then also gives us an extra frost aura every 30 seconds if we're struck below 75% health. A few optional choices that you can take in the first line is Latin Stamina. This grants vigor when we attune to water, which has a 10-second cooldown, but it also restores endurance to allies that we grant vigor to. That part does not have a 10-second cooldown, which synergizes very well with a second optional choice, which is Invigorating Torrents. This will give our auras regeneration and vigor, but we lose the 10-man aspect, so this would be in more of a 5-man scenario. These two synergize together can create a high amount of regeneration and endurance uptime, restoring endurance very quickly. Sand Imbued Melodies, which does a passive sand as well, is also an option, but that would be more for a non-healing build. The next trait line we're going to review is Water. Water is your main healing trait line. We typically take Soothing Ice to get a little extra regeneration if we're critically hit. Aquamancer's Training for reduced weapon skills cooldown on water. And Powerful Aura for any aura that you grant to yourself is granted to nearby allies. Note that this only has a 5-target cap. This trait synergizes very well with the Tempest trait we just talked about, Unstable Conduit. If for whatever reason you are not taking Powerful Aura, that is a good candidate to not take Unstable Conduit as well. You could swap for Latin Stamina or Gale's Song. Other effective Grandmasters are Soothing Power, which makes our Soothing Mist more effective, which is very good for passive healing. And Cleansing Water is also very strong if we need to cleanse conditions. Other optional traits include Cleansing Wave, which removes a condition when we are tuning to water, and Stop, Drop, and Roll, which removes burning and chill on dodge. The third trait line that I recommend as our base is Air. There's mainly one reason why we take Air, and it is for this first trait, Zephyr's Boon. This trait grants boons to allies that you grant auras to, which in this case means Fury and Swiftness. This, paired with Tempestuous Aria, will give 10-man Might, Fury, and Swiftness just on the shouts alone, which really helps kind of give those boons that we were missing from a druid. The other traits in Air are not as critical, but I do recommend taking Fresh Air to when you critical strike, you'll refresh your air cooldown. This allows you to kind of get some flow into the rotation and end up camping Air if you don't have anything else to sit in. If you want an alternative to taking Air, each of the other trait lines has a viable option. Let's start with Fire. Fire, believe it or not, has a ton of combi clear options in its trait lines. In the first line, we'll take Lesser Cleansing Fire. This would clear conditions on our allies when we have more than 3 conditions on us. Next, we would take Smothering Auras, which would give us a longer duration of Fire Aura, but most importantly, it removes conditions from allies when we grant them an aura. That, again, synergizes very well with Tempestuous Aria. And finally, we would take Persisting Flames, which gives us a downstate lava font, but also increases our duration of our fire fields, and blasting a fire field gives us Fury. This can help out make up for the loss of Fury by not taking air. Another alternative to air could be the Arcane trait line. In the first line, there's not a whole lot of great choices, but we can take Renewing Stamina for some personal vigor uptime. Note that Arcane gives you this minor elemental attunement, which gives us increased might, regeneration, swiftness, and protection uptime on 5 targets. Next, we're going to take Arcane Resurrection. This is a very, very strong resurrection trait when we cast a geyser for extra healing and also reviving our allies. Elemental Enchantment gives us some extra concentration, which helps make up for some boon duration. And finally, Evasive Arcana is pretty strong in that in water we get a pretty strong heal from Cleansing Wave. Finally, we have the Earth trait line. While I believe Earth is the weakest of the 3, it still has some good use cases. Note that when you do attune to Earth, while you have the Earth trait line equipped, you will gain extra toughness. In the first line, we'll take Elemental Shielding. This gives us our aura's protection, which means that if we're taking Tempestuous Aria, we get our 10-man protection. This is a bit unnecessary, though, as with protection from the base skill of Aftershock, and from Sand Squall, and from Overload Earth, and from other sources such as a Chronomancer, you will likely already have permanent protection without this trait. In the second line, we can choose between either taking Rock Solid to grant stability to 5 targets, or we can take Geomancer's Training for reduced recharge on our Earth skills. This means that we can cast our Sand Squall more often. In the final line, we can either take Diamond Skin to remove conditions, or take Stoneheart if we want to not be critically hit while we're in Earth. Depending on your specific trait choices, you can have permanent uptime of 25 might, fury, swiftness, regeneration, and protection, all within a 600 range around you. In addition, you provide much more healing than a healing druid would while providing very similar buffs. If you run in a 5-man setting, you can also have permanent vigor uptime. Hopefully this video was helpful in you making an educated decision about when you should run a healing boon Tempest, and if you do decide to run it, what specific trait lines you should take for your use case. Thanks everyone!